This is episode 67 of the Fitness in Post podcast. To access the show notes for this episode, please visit fitnessinpost.com/67. This episode is sponsored by editstock.com. Editstock provides high-quality, uncut film footage for those who want to learn or practice the art of video editing. This cool service offers raw footage from a variety of genres, including action, comedy, sports, and documentary, so you can pick the same kinds of projects you're looking to get hired for. Editstock offers professional feedback on your work and even allows you to use your cuts for your demo reel. Multi-user educational licenses are also available. Visit editstock.com today to download a free sample scene and use the code FITNESS to save 10% on your order. This episode is sponsored by Cinemody. Cinemody produces high-quality, royalty-free, and post-friendly second-unit stock and visual effects footage for filmmakers. You can find their second-unit collection at fitnessinpost.com/Cinemody. That's CINEMOTI. And as a listener of the Fitness in Post podcast, we're offering you an exclusive 15% off discount code that's good for any order. Just enter FIP15 during checkout. My name is Zach Arnold, and I'm the creator of Fitness in Post. You may know me as Empire Editor on Twitter. I spent the last 10 years working long hours in a dark room and battled numerous health problems because of my less than ideal work environment. And that's what led me to building Fitness in Post. Whether you work in film and television post-production like me, or you're a designer, programmer, or anyone working a sedentary job all day, we bring you the practical tips, tools, and resources to bring health and wellness back into your life. You spend all day fixing in a post, now it's time for some Fitness in Post. Hello, and welcome to the Fitness in Post podcast, where it is my mission to help you optimize the most powerful operating system that you have, yourself. My guest today is Julian Smirke, who just completed work on Star Wars: The Force Awakens as an associate editor. Some of his assisting credits include Mission Impossible 3, Star Trek, Super 8, Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol, and Star Trek Into Darkness. Julian was the additional editor on Endless Love, and he is also currently working as an additional editor on a new film called Passengers. In our conversation today, we talk about Julian's path to working on one of the most successful films in history. While Julian believes that his path was largely paved with luck, I personally believe that it was largely based on making the right choices at the right times. And we go deep into those choices and how anyone can apply Julian's path to their own and make it in this industry. In my opinion, luck doesn't exist. It's simply when hard work meets opportunity. But before we jump into the interview, I would like to announce that I already have several people that are now enrolled for the first phase of my online course. While this first beta phase was by invite only, I will be opening the second phase in a few weeks, and invites will only be via the Fitness in Post mailing list. This is a 30-day online learning course that will show you step-by-step how you can sit less, focus more, increase your mental stamina, and become so active at work you'll never feel guilty for skipping a day at the gym again. And I know that we have all been there. It will show you how to properly set your goals so you'll actually stick with them. It'll show you how to reverse engineer bad habits into good ones, how you can modify your work environment to be more active throughout the day, how to hack your seated workstation so you could stand, and how to make the pain-free transition to a standing workstation if you'd like to. And if that isn't enough, it's also going to contain a library of videos that are created in conjunction with certified yoga instructors and chiropractors that will help you stay active, reduce stress, increase mobility, as well as alleviate chronic pain in common places like your neck, shoulders, and lower back. If you're interested in becoming a beta member, all you have to do is enter your email at fitnessinpost.com to receive your invite when the second phase of beta enrollment is ready in a few weeks. And now, without further ado, my conversation with Julian Smirke. So I am here today with Julian Smirke, who is the associate editor of Star Wars 7: The Force Awakens, a little tiny indie film that you may or may not have heard of. It was released in December, very obscure, very limited release schedule. But if you've heard of it, then this will be an interesting, relevant conversation for you today in the post-production world. So, Julian, it is a pleasure to have you here today.
Oh, thanks for having me, Zach. It's my first podcast, so I don't know what's about to happen, but we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, so I'm It's going to be really, really cool to talk about the film from this perspective, because I would assume there isn't a single person in the civilized world that has not heard of this film, and most likely, according to the box office numbers, most of them has seen it at least once. So that being the case, I think the obvious thing is to get Marianne and Mary Jo, the two editors of the film, have them on the show. Like, that's the obvious thing. But what I really want people to see is what it looks like a little bit more behind the scenes, because for somebody to look at them and say, well, I want to edit Star Wars someday, it's almost like it's this unattainable, unreachable, like pie in the sky that's never going to actually happen to me. But then you look at somebody in your position and you think, all right, well, he's in that same world. You're not that old. You're about my age or maybe even a little bit younger, very young, very hungry, but you've kind of moved into this world. So what I want to do first is I really want to give people a picture of where did your journey start and how did you actually get to the point where you were working on the biggest film in the history of cinema?
Well, first of all, we'll see about that with the biggest film in cinema history. Definitely domestically, but it's funny because my wife, Kristen Young, is also an editor as well, and she worked on Avatar. So we have like a household competition going, jokingly in the background, wondering if Star Wars is going to beat Avatar in global box office, which I think that goal seems kind of unattainable at this point. But for a while there, it was kind of a running joke in our house. But that's a big question. So how did I get to be working on this film? Well, the short answer would be that I started working with Marianne and Mary Jo on Mission Impossible 3 back in like 2005, 2006 is when the movie came out. And that was J.J. Abrams' first feature film, as a director. I was hired on that film basically as an apprentice editor at the very beginning and ended up on the movie as an assistant editor. And then, that kind of snowballed with jobs for me after that because Marianne Brandon asked me to be her first assistant on the next movie, which was the Jane Austen Book Club. It was a smaller film that we did together. And then pretty much every movie since then, especially, all of JJ's films we've done together since then. So, when I think about doing Star Wars, it kind of just evolved to sort of being lucky, I guess, in some way that I was a part of that crew and working on his films with Marianne and Mary Jo. So, the history of that working environment and that family of, working family of people that I've been working with for so long now is kind of goes back about 10 years ago. So, it's not like, I got lucky and got the gig on Star Wars, although I did, but, there was a lot of groundwork and years and different movies that we went from one movie to the other to get there. But before that, I kind of started in the industry back in 2001. Actually, in 2000, my wife, Kristen, and I, we moved to Vancouver, Canada, all the way from Australia. And we'd never done film work in Australia. And we sort of dived into it as PAs on set in production. And we were in Vancouver working on sort of day calls and weekly calls on various different movies and TV shows, all sorts of stuff for about a year. And that was our introduction to the film industry. And it was a great learning ground to see all the different jobs that everyone does on set. And most of it we were pretty uninspired by, because on set, if you've ever been on a set, there's a lot of technical utility stuff that goes on. And, it's not extremely glamorous unless you're maybe an actor or maybe the director or a producer or something who's got a lot of creative input going on, or one of the heads of department like a DP or a production designer. So it was a good learning experience for us and for me to see, how it worked and what was out there. And then eventually we moved from Canada down to Los Angeles. In LA is when we started to, and when I started to pursue post-production, just to see the other side of how everything works. And it was then that I sort of realized this is so much better, because you really get to see how a film is made and put together. And there's that satisfaction of seeing the thing through to the very end and seeing how it gets shaped and comes together and gets completed. So, So I started a long time ago, or it feels like a long time ago. And very specifically, once I moved to LA, it was all about editing and post production, and started out as a PA, and then just worked on feature films, from the beginning as a PA, and just tried to learn a lot of stuff, and met a lot of people, and spent a lot of time out of, unemployed at the beginning. And then it just sort of evolves, and, goes from one job to the next eventually. And sort of here I am working on Star Wars. Never would have thought that would have happened.
Well, the one thing that I want to bring up right away is you'd mentioned several times that you got lucky. And anybody that has heard me on this show in the past or has heard me on other shows where I've been a guest, to me, luck is a four-letter word, and I don't believe in it, because to me, luck is when hard work meets opportunity. And there's no way that you spent 8 or 9 years in the J.J. Abrams system and you were asked back just because you got lucky. So the reason you have done that many films with his crew for 9 years is because most likely you are pretty good at what you do, because I can't imagine that JJ or Mary Jo or Marianne or anybody on the post team is like, well, Julian's not very good, but he's a nice guy, so we'll give him the benefit of the doubt. Like, no, people drop the axe at a moment's notice when this kind of money is on the line. So I don't believe in luck, and there's a reason that you got where you are. So I want to make sure that you get the credit for all of that.
That's very sweet of you to say. I totally agree with what you're saying, except the luck factor, I think, in my mind, really comes into play in occasional moments. So for me, the lucky part of it was getting hired on Mission Impossible 3 back then. And I didn't realize that at the time. I do feel like I was lucky enough to get that specific interview for that job and get the job. And of course, exactly what you're saying, there's no luck involved in the longevity of, keeping a job and being good at what you do, and then, working with the same crew for so long. And you're absolutely right. There's nothing lucky about that side of it. It's just the initial part of it. And I think there's benchmarks. Probably everybody who listens to your show too, especially people who work in editing, would agree to a certain extent that there are lucky moments. And it's not all about luck. It's really about hard work and good attitude and all the rest of it. But the moments of luck, really, they're tiny moments that can turn your career into some specific direction that you didn't think it was going to go in, or, that's what I mean by luck.
Sure. And I can understand that. But what I actually want to do, that you actually kind of stole the next question out of my mouth. You probably don't even realize it. But when I go to all these different industry events or listen to podcasts and I hear people give their quote unquote story, like, here's my story, here's the path that I took. What I always felt when I was younger listening to these was saying, well, all that's great, but I can't actually do that. Like, I'm not going to have the story that you do. So for me, the pivotal point in your career has nothing to do with Star Wars. It has to do with Mission Impossible 3, like you said. So what I like to do is really break down how things actually happen and be able to apply them to other people's lives with actionable steps. Because it's one thing to say, well, I got the job on Mission Impossible 3 and I did this movie and this movie and that movie, and I was a hard worker and I did my job and everybody liked me and they invited me back and I did Star Wars. But to me, where that story really starts is you got the job on Mission Impossible 3. So the most logical question for somebody that's a little bit younger, maybe they're an apprentice, maybe they're an assistant, and they're saying, I just feel like I'm really good at what I do. I put in the time, I put in the effort, but where's my Mission Impossible 3? So I actually want to, and I don't know the story at all. I have no preparation. I know nothing about your story, but I want to hear some of the steps that led you to getting your job on Mission Impossible 3. And I want to break that down for people so they can say, well, that I can do. So it doesn't feel so like, oh, well, yeah, he got on Mission Impossible, that's not going to happen to me. I want to encourage people to realize that anybody can make this happen if they do the right thing. So let's talk specifically about what the steps were that got you on Mission Impossible 3.
Well, that's an interesting one. Coming from Australia and then via Canada to Los Angeles, I was starting fresh in a very new city, which is a lot of people in Los Angeles have that here, because it's a city made up of a lot of people from somewhere else. So, I'm sort of no exception to that. And when I moved here, it was barely know anybody and sort of trying to, break into an industry where you're sort of starting out fresh. And my work ethic and sort of drive of wanting a career and all the rest of it was certainly something that I had a pretty strong work ethic. So it wasn't about that. It was more about trying to get a job. So at the beginning, definitely, spent a lot of time unemployed trying to weigh up the options of like, well, can I pay bills this month, or should I be holding out for a job that may or may not come? And I was fortunate enough that, my wife does exactly the same job and in the same, field in editing, in post-production. And we were both sort of as a team kind of like trying to do the same thing, and we would get jobs at different times, and sometimes she'd be working, sometimes I'd be working. So but fast forwarding and getting closer to Mission Impossible 3, it was tough for me because I spent a couple of, probably about a good, I want to say 15 months, so like a year and a half leading up to Mission Impossible 3, I spent most of that time out of work and unemployed. And all those questions come up in your mind. Like, first and foremost, the negative side goes, oh my God, I'm not good enough to do this job. Nobody wants me. Nobody wants to hire me. And then you sort of go through the spectrum of like, well, it's not that, I just don't know enough people. And then, it's like, how long, you start questioning, how long am I going to hold out just to try and get a job, And so as the that 15 months, rolled on, I'd come off a movie called The Alamo, which was a film that I was on for about a year. And I started that film as a PA, an editing PA, and I got into the union and became an apprentice about halfway through the show being an apprentice. It was a great, that was sort of another benchmark turning point for me in my career, because just, getting into the union back then was kind of, it felt like a very uphill mountain to climb. And once I got in and was able to sort of, get slightly better pay as an apprentice because it's union regulated, and then finishing that job, that was a tough one because I was on it for almost a year, and I felt like it almost took me out of the loop of hearing about other jobs or being in contact with other people that would sort of pass you jobs. So then after that, I was out of work for a big chunk of time. I got a couple of jobs here and there that were sort of small little stints of work that was sort of almost like little bites. And one of them was the Polar Express, which was great and a good experience. And that was working on a Robert Zemeckis film. It was a motion capture film, and it was quite unique, and at the time especially. And but it still wasn't a solid job that I was, staying on for a long period of time. And then through a mutual friend of ours, someone Kristen had worked with, an assistant editor, her name's Paula Sui. She was very, very kind enough to get me an interview on Mission Impossible 3 because they needed some more crew. She was a person who was working on the show already or had just started. And when I say, going back to the luck thing, it was just the timing. It was lucky that I happened to be at a party of a friend's, and we saw her and caught up, and the timing of it was good. And she said, oh, we're looking for someone, and if you're looking for an apprentice job, and I had been an assistant on a couple of those smaller jobs in between, she was like, come in for an interview. I can't promise you anything, but it might work out. And then talking about the luck factor, I do feel like that was a lucky moment because the planets aligned for that little tiny time, space in time. And I was able to get an interview, and then, got the job. And then the journey on that film for me was a unique one because not only was it a work thing, it was more of a personal thing for me because of being out of work for so long before that job. And so while I was on that job, I was extremely determined to learn as much as humanly possible because I felt like, I just come off 15 months of basically being unemployed. And, oh my God, if I can't take this opportunity now to, I've got no hope, at all if I don't just stay, unpaid after hours, do some free time, don't worry about getting paid, and luckily enough, the crew was really good crew. They were very supportive and very helpful and willing to teach me. And I learnt from not just one or two people, but like 3 or 4 people on the show, different sort of things. And by the end of that movie, I found myself as an assistant editor on the show, and probably I think it was maybe 2 or 3 months before it finished. And then it kind of set me up in some way. Now, at the time, I didn't realize it was going to set me up to keep working with Marianne and working on JJ movies. For me, I didn't even think about that at the time. It was more about, I've got to learn how to do this job really well. I've got to learn all the stuff that I don't know as much as possible from everybody else, and then take that opportunity and see, how I can get the next job after this is all done. Because I think the fear of another 15 months out of work was like, if I'm out of work that long, why am I in Los Angeles? And I might as well go home to Perth, Australia, where it's a nicer city and a lot calmer, and I could do something else with my life. So it was a little bit of a personal journey for me on Mission Impossible 3. And I really do feel like that was a turning point of a movie for us, for me, I should say. And I wish there was pearls of wisdom I could give people, but it's kind of, that was my journey, and that's how it happened for me. And really, in my mind, it was the determination in that moment on that film just to learn everything that I could learn.
Well, and I think that the important things that you really brought out are, and these need to be heard by everybody that's in the industry that has gone through the struggle or struggling now, is that you were unemployed for 15 months and you're now, or were working on Star Wars, now working on another film, but all people see is you have Star Wars on your resume. That's so cool. They don't realize that there's this long, drawn out period where you're questioning whether or not you should even be in the industry. I've had that period too. Mine lasted over 2 years, and it wasn't literally 2 years with zero paycheck whatsoever, but it was 2 years of not getting any work that I wanted, getting stuff that just paid enough so I could pay the mortgage and survive, but I wasn't making any headway forwards in my career. But it's a very important growing and learning experience, and I find that it actually will help forge you into a much stronger person and a much stronger editor or assistant or whatever stage you're at. So I want to dig a little bit deeper, because I know you said you can't find any pearls of wisdom, but I want to try and mine some out of there.
Okay.
So I'm going to ask you a question, and I just want you to, and you may not even have the answer to it, but when you were going through those 15 months, why didn't you go back? What was the thought in your head that made you keep going, where you said, I'm not ready to go back to Perth yet?
Well, that's an interesting one. There's probably so many factors involved in that. One was my wife was here and working. And of course, we had plenty of those discussions about, oh my God, I should go. Why am I here? And Kristen would say to me, I'm here. And so that's why you're here. So, all joking aside with that, I think the drive and determination is like not wanting to go backwards in life generally. And I've never had that. I never really wanted that. So I felt like if I did sort of, part of it would feel like giving up. Part of it would feel like moving backwards in life and going back to Perth and, all the rest of it. But, it's hard when you're in that moment, because you do have all those, or I did all have all those thoughts of like, well, how long is too long before I should just get on with my life and do something else, because this is clearly not working out. That's a tough one. So it was like a lot of discussions, and very, having a very supportive wife was a good thing at the time. And, spending, I guess, a few years leading up to that point, I didn't want to see that wasted either, to go, oh, well, okay, I'm going to go be a bartender now, or, do something else. And that's something that I've always had, is a lot of drive, regardless of whatever it is that I'm doing at a certain point in life, career-wise. I've always had sort of a focus to try to focus on something specific and not flounder and go all over the place to like switch, careers or switch different directions and all that sort of stuff. And quite honestly, I think a big part of that for me is attention span, because if I'm doing something that I am not really sort of into, my attention span is just really short and lacking. And then I'm not really giving that particular thing, my 100%. Whereas if because I liked editing and I wanted to get into it, and I could see making movies like being the thrill of a lifetime, and just being into it so much and passionate about it, it's somehow makes it easier. For me, it does anyway. So yeah, there was plenty of times in that 15-month period where I just kept thinking, why am I doing this? How long do I hold out? All that sort of stuff. And I was in that 15-month period, like I said, I got a couple of jobs, one of which was Polar Express. And those little nibbles of jobs and employment was like, well, maybe I'm crazy with all these negative thoughts. And, then you get sort of a second wind, so to speak, and then you're unemployed again. And it's like, oh, okay, so how do I capitalize on what I just had? That's hard because I can't. That movie's done. And, so that's a tough one. I think it's a personality thing for me, that big chunk of unemployment that I guess the thought of either giving up or moving backwards and going back to Australia was much more of a terrible thing in my mind to do than to just keep trying to be unemployed and try to get what I wanted. And then the funny thing that grew out of that, or the interesting thing, I should say, that grew out of that, what I learned from that experience, and I don't think you could sort of teach this to anybody. You really just have to go through it, is that, it just, now when I'm unemployed, I kind of welcome it. And I don't worry about getting the next job because, obviously in editing and in working in feature films and any sort of editorial capacity on certain jobs in this industry, we're all freelancers. And in doing the freelance work, you're inevitably unemployed until the next job comes along. And I saw a lot of people, a lot of assistants around me and a lot of people in the industry worry about the next job. And because I'd gone through that really tough period, I stopped worrying. It completely disappeared for me. Not even that it lingered a little bit, like 5% or something. Like it's just gone. So in between jobs now, I never worry about anything. And the funny thing I just think to myself and say to other people is, if you're determined enough and you have enough drive, it's really not about, worrying about, oh, when's the next job going to come? Is it ever going to come? It's more about the timing of it. It's going to come. That job will always be around the corner. It's just, how far away is it? Is it a week away for you? Is it a couple of months? Is it a year? And if you don't give up, there's no chance that you're just going to be unemployed for the rest of your life. That just won't work. So, I mean, if there's anything to take away from my experience, or what I took away from it, was simply, it's a matter of time before that next job will come around, and it will come around. It always does.
Yeah, I think that that's absolutely key, and I could not have said it better myself, that it's all about the perseverance and the drive. And you also said something that's really key, which is that you had the focus, and you were kind of specific about what it is that you wanted to do. And if you weren't doing something that didn't specifically fit into this overall framework of the job that you wanted, you didn't have the attention span and you didn't have the passion. And I think that's key. And I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole too much because I literally have a 120-minute podcast episode that goes down this exact rabbit hole about how to be specific, how to break down your goals, how to go towards them, how to network, all these things, the skill set you need to build. So I'll have a link to episodes 56 and 57, which go down that rabbit hole extensively. But that's the key. And the other one is, like you said, you just didn't give up. Eventually, something's going to come along, and I will never forget those moments that I've had. I don't know if you've had them or not, but when I went through that 2-year period where I just could not get anything that I wanted to work on, you just sit there with your head in your hands and you say, why am I doing this? Like, where is this going? But then the next question is, well, what could I be doing instead? Oh, not editing. Well, that's not an option because I don't want to do anything except this job and this career. So I just have to kind of keep doing the crap work, and passion doesn't pay bills. So sometimes you have to take really crappy projects. But my philosophy was always, as long as I'm editing, I'm not going to be editing the next Citizen Kane, but if I'm just editing something, I'm still in a way honing my skill set. I'm still learning something. Even like for me, there's no better way to learn how to be a great editor than work on horrible films. And I have worked on the marketing campaigns for a lot of really, really, really bad movies. And I feel like a lot of my skills and my tool set comes from working on bad movies. So I think that when people have their head in their hands and they have that moment, they say, I'm just trying to break in and I want to work on Star Wars someday, but the only offers I'm getting are for these crappy little projects. those are learning experiences no different than any other, and you shouldn't look at them as just failures. And even if they are failures, if you talk to anybody that's immensely successful in any industry, it's not just film editing, but in any industry, they've just failed more and they've failed faster than anybody else. They're not magical. They just decided, I'm going to keep pushing forwards. I'm not going to give up, and I'm just going to learn from these failures. And then all of a sudden something tips and they become great. And it sounds like your story is very, very similar, where you just went through that dark period of, am I ever going to do anything like this again, or am I going to work at Starbucks the rest of my life? But you had planted seeds, and those seeds started to germinate, and bam, one of those seeds became Star Wars.
Yeah, that's very true.
So, I think it can be very encouraging, but people have to realize there's a lot of patience involved, because you weren't unemployed for 15 months last year with no credits and you got Star Wars. There's a long journey that you went through to make that happen, but it did end up happening because, like you said, you persevered, you didn't give up, and you were focused on continuing to go down that path.
Yeah, that's so true.
So there's a lot of gems and pearls to pull out of that, and I still don't believe that any of it was luck. I really don't believe in luck. And yes, you were at a party with somebody, but if there wasn't a reason that they would have said to you, "Oh, well, I can get you the interviews," because you're good at what you did. So it was you'd done the hard work and you met opportunity. The two had a baby, and there you were. So that's kind of the way that I see it. So now that we've kind of taken people down the path of where you started and how you got where you are, the reason that I really wanted to have this show is Fitness in Post is not just about post-production. It's about maintaining some form of sanity and health in this industry, which is frankly next to impossible.
Yeah.
So what I want to do now is I want to paint a picture for the audience of what a day in the life actually looks like working on a gigantic tentpole film. And I know that there are phases where it changes a lot versus when you started the film, and you can talk about when you actually started, in what capacity you started, what the process looked like, how it changed and evolved. But I want people to kind of understand, what does a day in the life look like? Because it's one thing to say, I want to work on Star Wars, but it's another thing to actually be able to survive the day-to-day rather than just have it on the resume.
Yeah. Well, the day-to-day, I think everybody can attest to this that works in editing, is long hours. I mean, everything, and it certainly goes through worse periods and nicer periods, but the hours can be absolutely brutal, like just really long hours. I mean, an average day for the most part, and sort of an average to sort of standard good day would be, you're starting work at like 9 or 9:30 in the morning, and you'd finish somewhere around, somewhere between 9 and 10 p.m. And working on feature films, it's kind of the norm, or at least it's been the norm for me for many years, for many movies. And, somewhat of those hours certainly get worse in real crunch time periods, and sort of other times, they're a little better. But usually the little better is not that much better than that. Like, we very rarely, if at all, ever get out at 7 or 8 o'clock at night. I mean, it's a pretty rarity in work, or at least from my experience working in feature films. Depends on the movie, of course, and it depends on the size of the film and the pressures of it and all the rest of it. But, on a daily basis, I guess, you just sort of, depending on the process you're in post-production or during production, it's really about, like everybody would just, come in, grab some breakfast or grab some coffee and start working. And then you have a lunch break in the middle of the day. And sometimes your editors work through it, and sometimes you have to work through that lunch as well. And then sometimes you can take a break and, sit with some colleagues and, chill out for half an hour or an hour, and then you're back into it again. One thing I will say that they do, at least in my experience working on these films, is they look after you. They usually provide lunch for you. They provide dinner for you if you're staying late. So they find all these incentives to keep you there, which is not, it's not big brother intentional. It's just sort of the nature of the work, and sort of that you have to, it's just time consuming and you have to be there. So I don't know if that's even answering your question, Zach.
No, I think that's a really, really great place to start. It's just for people to understand that it is extremely long days. You're coming in at 9 or 9:30, and on a good day, leaving around 9 or 10. And then I'm sure there were plenty of bad days as well. Are you doing that for 5 days a week, 6 days a week, 7 days a week?
Most of the time on these shows, it's 5 days a week. From one movie to the next movie, it can be a bit different. We did a lot of 6-day weeks on Star Wars. Whereas on Star Trek Into Darkness, it was more 5-day weeks. And then, at crunch time, sometimes it is 7 days a week. Sometimes it's 6-day weeks. But we did a lot more of the 6-day week thing on Star Wars consistently just because of just the sheer amount of work we had to do. A lot of that was during production as well when we were in London for a little bit. And, some of that carried over into post-production at the beginning of post-production. And then, of course, hitting benchmarks for certain screenings, especially the lead up till, the movie was released in the last few months or so. Again, you'd end up doing 6-7 day weeks pretty consistently just because there's so much work to get through. But yeah, it definitely depends on the project and the movie. It varies ever so slightly. And, there are some horrible shifts that you get to do where you don't go home at all. And unfortunately, fortunately, those don't happen that often, but they seem to happen consistently for me at least once in the course of a show at some point. There's always some big screening at some point. And it's usually either the first or the second one, usually the first screening that we'll do, which is either for the studio or presenting it to a very important person or something. And those screenings always, I end up working, and so does the crew, through the night into the next day, screen, and then go home. And, there's some stories that I could tell you that were sort of beyond just working overnight. I had one particular movie where I had to do 2 nights in a row, which was horrible. And, nobody's forcing us to do this, by the way. Nobody's saying you have to sit there and do this. It's just the thing is you're in the trenches and you're part of a team and you just want to. Like at that point, regardless of, how you really feel about it, which is all you want to do is crash and go home and go to sleep. You're sort of in this team effort and everybody wants to sort of hit the screening and not let anybody down, which is a good thing. And that happens. So yeah, the one of the toughest things about working on these films is definitely long hours and in certain waves of leading up to screenings, there'll be consistent nights. Instead of coming home at between 9 and 10 o'clock at night, it might be somewhere between 11 and 12, or it might be between 12 and 1, or it might be somewhere in the 1 to 2 o'clock in the morning phase, in which case then you come in at 10 o'clock the next day, have 8 hours of turnaround, and then get back to it again. But luckily, what's great about it, or looking at the positive side to this, is it's not like you're on a movie and that happens every day, every week, the whole time. Like there's definitely comes in waves of, periods of where things are a little chiller and you're in the groove and you're working and everything's great. And then it's usually in the ramp up to a screening or to a specific, deadline of some kind. And that ramp up could be a week. It could be like 3 weeks leading up to that period. Sometimes more. It just depends on what's happening.
So let's walk through a little bit then of what your actual duties are day to day, because I know that you're credited on the film as associate editor, but you kind of evolved a little bit over the course of the film, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I started the film as I do, all of these films, especially working on JJ's movies and with Mary Ann and Mary Jo as a first assistant editor. Essentially that's what I'm hired to do. I'm hired to be there and assist Mary Ann Brandon. We have another first assistant editor that assists Mary Jo Markey. And so there's like 2 editors and 2 first assistants. So when we jump on board and we're in production, it is the daily's grind, so to speak. It's, probably my least favorite part of the entire process because it's a lot of technicalities where you're getting in those dailies and it's great to see them, but you have to prep everything for your editor, make sure everything technically is going to go smooth. And it's not about the moment of like making everything smooth for the moment. When you're on these movies, you have to make sure everything is up and running and going to work well for you in like a year's time sometimes. Like you have to think ahead and go, when we go to finish this movie and go through the DI process and go for the final conform or the final color timing, is any of these dailies coming in now, are they missing information that is going to create problems for us in a year when we're finishing? So having gone through the process several times now, we sort of have it down, which is great. But it's sort of the production side of things is sort of the dailies grind of syncing and making sure things are accurately done, and then you pass off the dailies to the editor, who's then to Marianne or Mary Jo, and then they start cutting the scenes as they come in. And on top of that, in that phase of the process during production, once you've done that, we're also dealing with an editorial code book, which is like FileMaker Pro databases, which is essentially like a database that lists every scene and take of everything that was shot on the entire film, like absolutely everything is accounted for. And it's just like it's a whole bunch of technical numbers information, really, is what it is. And it's a good place to search and find for stuff later when you're looking for something. Plus, it's sort of studios. It's really helpful for studios to have it, and marketing departments to have an editorial code book. And then on top of that, it sort of branches out from that, because then we have a VFX database that our VFX editor would use for turning over shots for the film and keeping track of, scanning stuff, because we quite often shoot 35 millimeter film when we work on JJ's films. So those databases will sort of keep track of the technical side of everything. And so on the daily basis, what our day looks like during production, it's really, you come in, sync dailies, check all the metadata, make sure everything's working properly, make sure there's no problems, prep your dailies bins for your editor, and then deal with the code book. And then you also sort of get an apprentice or another assistant editor up and running and going on scripting, doing scripter in Avid, because our editors, it's an extremely useful tool for them to have quick access to all the takes and line readings. And then just keep doing that grind and repeating that process until you're sort of finished. And then ultimately, as scenes get built, even while they're still shooting in production, things start shifting. And what happens there is we start to get involved a little bit more on the creative side, which is we start cutting in temp sound design to the editor's sequences. And because they're still focused on cutting each scene as they roll in, we start doing temp sound, putting in temp music. And then the evolution of that is, once you're done in production, it's more of my favorite time during the process, which is when you sort of get dailies off your plate and you're not dealing with that stuff anymore. And then basically what happens is you shift into this more of a creative mode. And quite often I'll find myself in Marianne's room, because she'll say, "Hey, Julian, come and have a look at this. And, is this scene working? Is JJ going to like it?" And I'm like, "I don't know if he's going to like it, but let's see if I like it." And then, we have a pretty good rapport because we worked for so long together, that sort of she has really good instincts, and I feel like she trusts my instincts as well. And we'll talk about scenes on the creative side of things and see how, she can make them better. And sometimes I'll try something that might make it better or help something, or it might just spur an idea for something else that might come up. So that daily grind, from dailies, which is a grind, shifts into sort of more of the pleasant creative side of things in post-production. And then that just sort of keeps evolving and gets stronger and stronger as we move on. The temp sound gets better and better because you have more time to work on it. And then we start sort of screening stuff internally, screening the movie so that we can, have a look and see if things are working, and JJ can start pulling things apart and seeing what things don't work in the story and shifting structural things around sometimes. And quite often there's rewrites and reshoots and all that sort of stuff. So the daily process does shift depending on where you're at in the process.
And how long were you actually in the kind of the daily grind of dailies and production before you went into that creative phase of director's cut?
Yeah, well, so we started back in May of 2014, when we start right around the time or just before they start shooting, So that went through, and we shot until early to mid-November. So it was big shoot, about 6 months or so of shooting. And then we shifted into post-production in sort of, a month or so, mid-November up till mid-December, before the Christmas break. We had like a couple of weeks off over Christmas. And, we were just in the post-production phase at that point. And then, we had the luxury of having basically a year of post-production on the show. And, I say it's a luxury. It's on a big film like this, it's quite common for that to be the case. And I think a big part of that is visual effects take a long time, especially when you've got a movie that has a lot of shots and a lot of complicated stuff going on. So yeah, we basically shot for about 6 months. I think there was like 103 days worth of principal photography on the film. And then we shifted into post-production and had basically just a little bit over a year of post-production on it. So the entire time period for me on this job was probably between 19 and 20 months of work, which, working on Star Wars, it's awesome, but it's funny because it's not that unlike the system and the process we do on every film. So it just happened to be Star Wars this time around, which was kind of exciting.
So then if you started as a first assistant primarily, for those that are listening saying, well, I'm a first assistant as well, and I'm really trying to start making that transition and trying to get credit so I can become an editor, you walked away from the film being considered an associate editor. So what are some of the processes and things that you did that you took you from starting first assistant to now having an associate editor credit on a huge film?
That's an interesting one, because I feel like there's no sort of hard, fast, set path in terms of all of that. I think that a big part of the advantage that I had is working with these editors for a really long period of time on several movies. And I think a big part of it was their willingness and generosity to include me in the creative process. And that's not to say that I'm editing the movie, because they certainly did all of that and it wasn't me doing that. It was just sort of that, it's kind of that gray area that's in between. It's almost like a transitional credit in some way, that it's to say that, yeah, I was a first assistant editor doing my regular first assistant editor duties and job on the movie, but then it sort of took it to another level in the sense of like another step in towards the creative side. And that really wasn't my doing. A part of it was, but a big part of it also is the willingness of Marianne and Mary Jo to include me in that, and include Matt Evans, the other first assistant editor, who became an associate editor on the movie. So Matt and I were lucky enough to be included in those creative discussions and input into the film as it goes along, which is not unlike what we've done in the past on previous movies, by the way. On this one, it was just there was more of it than on previous films. It's a tough one to answer because it really depends who you're working for, and it really depends on the editors that you're working very closely with. And obviously, working with them over a long period of time, there's a trust that's built up over time as well. That, is sort of a trust that, there's certain things that happen in editing rooms and certain discussions that happen along the way where you wouldn't want sort of the outside world to know about certain things. And I feel like this goes with every job, that there's somewhat, you trust when you have conversations, confidential conversations with people, behind closed doors about certain things. And I'm talking about creative things on the movie where, it might have started in a place that was horrible, and we all agree that, oh my God, that was a terrible idea. And then it ends up evolving into something where you get there in the end, and it's so much better than when you started out. So just being included in that, I think, helped, get the associate editor credit. And it's a tricky one also because it's not really a union recognized credit, because it's not really a union position. I should say, I guess. It's one of those things that basically, I mean, in my mind, the way I look at it is that it's really being a first assistant and then taking a step up in terms of your input and the time you spend and the attention that you spend on it creatively with your editor. And first and foremost, what has to happen is that editor, and for me, that was Marianne Brandon, and also Mary Jo Markey, but mainly Marianne because I assist her, is her willingness and generosity to include me in that process. So like I said, somebody could take that information that I'm saying and apply it to their movie that they're on, but it might not work out because their editor might be in a different situation and not able to do something like that for their first. Sometimes they would love to and they can't. Sometimes they just don't because they don't want to. So it really depends on who you work for. And I'm fortunate that I work for very supportive editors.
Well, and you're also fortunate that you're providing a service that they really want. And you're doing a great job at it too. So I think that certainly factors into it.
Yeah.
And I think that the other thing, I won't go down this rabbit hole at all because I actually, again, did an entire hour-long show that's all about making the jump from assistant editor to editor. I'll just put a link to that episode in the show notes. It was 59. But I'm sure that there's a lot of it being that because it's not like you're just doing dailies. You're not just tracking metadata. You are an integral part in building the temp sound, building the world, doing the temp score. Like even if they're not saying, here's a 10-minute chunk, Julian, you get to cut all of this from this point in the story to this point in the story. You have such a creative hand in so many parts of the process that you are in essence an associate editor or an additional editor, which is another very common credit. And I think that those are things that people need to realize, that it's not just busy work. You are contributing yourself creatively. And if you are in a position where you can have an editor that understands that, sit down with them and say, hey, we've been working together for a long time. What kind of opportunity is there for some type of different credit or an opportunity to do more? And yes, there are politics involved and studios involved and money involved, but it all has to start with a single conversation. Otherwise, it's never going to happen. And you're going to say, why isn't this happening to me? You have to start that conversation.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And the other thing I'll say that I didn't really get to in what I was talking about there is also Marianne will throw me scenes. Like she will say, hey, Jules, try to cut this scene. I'm having a go at it. JJ's been working with me on this particular scene. It's kind of tough. It's not working. It's not doing what he wants us to do, what he's hoping that it would do. And they'd been working on this one particular scene for a couple of weeks. And then she'd throw it to me and go, see if there's anything you can try with it because we're just not having any luck. And then I'll try to have a go at it. And of course, when you're at that point where they've already worked on it, those amazing creative minds and that creative team going at it for a couple of weeks, there's no chance in hell that I'm going to be able to make it better than they can. But what Marianne is looking for from me giving it a shot is really, maybe he'll just find something in the material that I didn't. Maybe he'll find a shot or a reaction of Hans or, Han Solo doing something that I didn't see or missed or interpreted in a different way. So she would throw me scenes to cut, which is really awesome. And then there were other times where she was just insanely busy in certain periods where she would say, can you assemble this kind of bigger sequence for me? Because she just didn't have the time and there was sort of deadlines coming up and she just had to get through other stuff. So there was times where I think I did an assembly, which, was like the castle battle sequence in the film. And that was fun and great to go through it. And certainly what I put together was nowhere near what it ended up being. But it was, at least for her, it was helpful to have some kind of an assembly together so she could work from something that wasn't starting from scratch with nothing. And those time factors, and of course she'll take that, it'll evolve into something that's totally her own, and then JJ will work with her on it and it'll become something else again. Those opportunities too is very valuable to get the experience of actually having your editor throw stuff to you and say, here, try this, try and be creative, try and go and cut those scenes. So those are sort of, you really have to be doing the editing work as well. It can't just be just sitting in a room and giving your opinion and going, this is not working and maybe you can try this. So it's kind of a culmination of all of that sort of stuff.
Yeah, and I know assistants as well that'll see it almost as like, oh, they're passing my work, their work onto me. Like they just want me to do their busy work for them and assemble something. And it's just the absolute worst way to look at it. Because if you take that scene that Marianne and JJ worked on for 2 weeks and they're banging their heads against a wall and they say, Julian, take a shot at this. And a lot of people think, well, come on, like, come on, he's J.J. Abrams. Like, he's going to look at anything that I did and care. So why would I give this any effort? But the important thing to realize is when you're working with the right types of creative professionals, you might do a new version of the scene. And inevitably, the editor and the director are going to say, you know what? It's not everything that we want and it's not perfect. But there's this one cut that you did that I never in a million years would have thought to do that was brilliant. I didn't see that one little look in that one shot for 2 seconds. That then sparks an entirely new direction, and a scene is built around that one little inspiration. And to have the power as an assistant to be able to spark that inspiration, that's the kind of thing that people remember, and they start to rely on you more, and they start to throw more in your direction.
Yeah, that's so true. And a part of this process too is that JJ himself is very, very open and really, really genuinely wants to hear people's opinions on stuff. Like, he'll be like, come and have a look at this while he's in the room with Marianne, and we'll sit there and we'll watch it. And he'll be like, what do you think of this? And we'll talk about it as well with him. And there'll be, times throughout, not every day. It's not every day like that, obviously, but there are sort of times throughout the process when, we might have had a screening or something, and he'll just sort of walk past me at some point and he'll be like, you saw the screening, right? And I'll be like, yeah. And he'll be like, if you can think of anything, if you have any ideas, just email me, let me know. And he's always been like that. What's great about working for him is he's not precious about what he's shot. He's not precious about the material in a way that sort of locks him into, oh my God, this has to be in the movie because of this reason. He's very open to changing things and losing things that don't work. And he's also very open to and receptive to the input that he gets from not just me, but like a lot of people that work around him. That's a very fortunate position to be in, where we're all working for a guy who is extremely smart about it and very film savvy and really knows that he can't hold on to things that might not work, for various reasons. Like, sometimes they do a huge setup during production, and it might take them 2 days to set up this one amazingly massive, huge shot. And it looks beautiful in the dailies, and in the moment when they shoot it, it's amazing. And everybody's like, woo, look, we just got that shot. And then, in post-production, 6 months later, he'll look at that shot and be like, if it's not working, let's lose it. I don't think every director can do that, but he's really good at doing that.
Yeah, and I'm sure that there are people that are writing the checks for it that are like, really? Oh my God, all the money we spent. But some directors are precious about that, but it's great to see that he isn't, which I think is a huge testament to the success that he's had. Because if he can say to an assistant or an associate or anybody and be like, hey, send me an email and let me know it doesn't work, that's why things become great, because it's not my ideas and this is how I want to do it. It becomes a collaborative and a collective process, and everybody gets a say in making the film. And that's why I think he's had the success that he has.
Yeah, that's true. And he's also then looking at, no stone is unturned for him then. Like, I think the part of his process, which is very important for him, is that he's thought about every possible which way to go and what things to lose and what things work and don't work. And by the end of the process, he can feel, he can sleep well at night knowing that he tried and at least thought about everything that could be thought about to make the best of the material that we have. And in some cases, there are certain situations where we go, we don't have this, we need to shoot that. And so they'll go and reshoot or additionally shoot another scene or a dialogue line or a shot that would help to connect something in a scene, So we quite often do that as well.
Well, I want to be very, very protective of your time, because I know that you have a brand new 3-month-old daughter that's waiting for you, and I certainly don't want to keep you away from that. But before we go, I just want to let people know, what are you on to next? Whatever level you can talk about it.
So the next project, it's an exciting film. I just started about a week ago, actually, but it's a movie for Sony Pictures. It's a movie called Passengers, and it's directed by Morten Tildum, who did The Imitation Game, and it stars Chris Pratt and Jennifer Lawrence. It's a space movie, so it's a sci-fi thing, so it's right up my alley and right up Marianne's alley too. Her and I love science fiction stuff. And it's really cool. You can probably read stuff about it online without me telling you too much anyway. But it's an exciting film. It's a really big film. It's a big undertaking. They've been shooting it for a while, so we're coming on a little bit into the process. And we're supposed to be, I think the film is released at the end of the year in December, unless something changes, which, you never know. But yeah, it's exciting. And I'm going to be an additional editor on this. And it's a bit different to last time or on the previous movies because, like I said before in this discussion, usually I'm getting hired as a first assistant editor and then see how you go through the process. And you'd hope that Marianne or whoever your editor is throws you some scenes to cut and see how it goes. Whereas this one's a little different. I'm actually hired from the beginning as an additional editor. So I get to skip all of the assistant technical stuff and just edit every single day, which is a dream come true.
Well, it's just fantastic to be able to hear that that's where your trajectory has led you, and you now, from day one, get to actually do cutting because that's really what it's all about. So is there anywhere that you want to send anybody in the audience to, like a website, or if they want to learn more about you or your story, you have any links you want to include?
Oh my God. I'm not that technically geeky savvy in terms of the world of having my own website. So I apologize if people are looking for stuff. I mean, I have an IMDb page that just shows you all the work that all the films that I've worked on over the years. You can always look that up. And of course I'm on Twitter if people want to have, very minimal chats.
Right. And what is your Twitter handle?
It's just my full name. It's Julian Smirke, Julian Smirke.
Awesome. Well, I'll make sure that that's included in the show notes if people want to reach out and just start, like you said, a 140-character conversation. So it has been an absolute pleasure having you on the shows. I learned so much just myself, and I hope that everybody else did too. So at this point, I will relieve you and let you go back to your family and your brand new daughter.
Thanks very much for having me, Zach.
Thank you for listening to episode 67 of the Fitness in Post podcast. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to access any of the resources discussed, visit our show notes at fitnessinpost.com/67. This episode is sponsored by editstock.com. Editstock provides high-quality, uncut film footage for those who want to learn or practice the art of video editing. This cool service offers raw footage from a variety of genres, including action, comedy, sports, and documentary, so you can pick the same kinds of projects you're looking to get hired for. You know the frustration of needing a reel to get a job and then needing a job to get a reel? Editstock solves this old chicken and egg problem by allowing you to use your cuts for your demo reel. Editstock is ideal for assistant editors trying to move up, editors transitioning to a new style or genre, and people who are brand new to editing. Editstock can even give you professional feedback on your work. Best of all, every time you buy raw footage on Editstock, 30% of the purchase goes to the filmmaker who created it. So you can help these indie directors earn back their budgets. Multi-user educational licenses are also available. Visit editstock.com to download a free sample scene and use the code FITNESS to save 10% on your order. This episode is sponsored by Cinemodi. Cinemodi produces high-quality, royalty-free, and post-friendly second-unit stock and visual effects footage for filmmakers. Let's say that you have a restaurant scene, but you just don't have enough activity in the shot. Need some additional extras? Cinemodi has the footage for that. Or maybe you need to add some three-dimensional depth to a flat shot. Want to add a defocused tree branch in the foreground? Cinemodi has that too. Their flagship second unit post-friendly footage features live-action visual effects content that can easily and affordably add production value and polish to your next project. You can find their second unit collection at fitnessinpost.com/Cinemodi. That's CINEMOTI. And as a listener of the Fitness in Post podcast, we're offering you an exclusive 15% off discount code that's good for any order. Just enter FIP15 during checkout. Thank you for listening. Be well.